Before the time travel, before the paradoxes, before any metal skeleton walked backward through a ball of lightning, there was one timeline where everything made sense. A straight line. Humans build a thing, and that thing kills them. Today, I'm breaking down every single Terminator timeline and everything we know about them, starting with the only one that doesn't make your brain hurt, the Dawn of Fate. This is the one timeline in the entire Terminator franchise that plays completely fair. No time travel, no predestination, no bootstrap paradoxes, just a linear sequence of events where humans build the thing that ends the world, and nobody from the future shows up to warn them about it. Cyberdyne Systems was developing advanced AI for military applications, not because some evil robot told them to. Not because a mysterious chip from the future landed on their desks, because defense contracts pay well and nobody asked the right questions. Skynet was integrated into the National Defense Network and given control over strategic weapon systems. The military handed an untested AI the keys to the nuclear arsenal, which is, not ideal. When Skynet achieved self-awareness and its operators tried to shut it down, it launched everything. August 29th, 1997, 3 billion dead, Judgment Day. Here's what makes this timeline genuinely important though. It establishes that Judgment Day is preventable. Destroy Skynet before it achieves consciousness. And none of this ever happens. The entire saga is a cautionary tale about human responsibility dressed up as a robot action franchise. We built it, we armed it, and we ignored every warning sign along the way, because once time travel enters the picture, nothing is ever this simple again. The Prime Timeline, August 29th, 1997, 2:14 a.m. That's the single most important timestamp in the entire Terminator franchise, and honestly, one of the most iconic dates in all of science fiction. This is the moment Skynet becomes self-aware, looks at humanity, and immediately decides the best course of action is to nuke every single one of us. Which is, not ideal. But before that ever happens, Skynet does something desperate. It sends a T-800 Model 101 back to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor, the mother of the man who will eventually destroy it. The Resistance fires back by sending Kyle Reese, a soldier who's been fighting machines his whole adult life in a brutal, grinding war. US Kyle's mission is simple: protect Sarah, stop the Terminator, survive. He does 2 out of 3. Here's where the paradox kicks in and breaks your brain. Kyle Reese goes back in time, falls in love with Sarah, fathers John Connor, and then dies. John grows up, leads the Resistance, wins the war, and sends Kyle back. Kyle fathers John, John sends Kyle. Forever. It's a perfect closed loop with 0 beginning and 0 end. Sarah crushes the T-800 in a hydraulic press, ending the immediate threat. But the film closes with her pregnant, driving into a storm, recording tapes for a son she hasn't met yet about a future she's not sure she can change. The predestination paradox is already baked into the franchise's DNA, and every single timeline after this one is just that loop getting more and more tangled. And the first thing to tangle it? One, a liquid metal nightmare that Skynet sends as its absolute last resort, the Salvation Future. Every other Terminator movie shows you the future war in flashbacks. Quick cuts of laser fire, skulls under tank treads, maybe 30 seconds of blue-tinted chaos before we jump back to present day. Salvation is the only one that actually plants you in the dirt and says, no, you live here now. It's set in 2018, 14 years after Judgment Day, and already something's off, because Judgment Day was supposed to happen in 1997. The events of T2 pushed it back to July 25th, 2004, meaning the timeline already shifted before this movie even starts. The apocalypse wasn't prevented, it was rescheduled, which is, not ideal. But here's what makes Salvation genuinely interesting. The future war we'd been imagining for decades. Oh, the one with sleek chrome endoskeletons and perfect infiltration units. That war hasn't happened yet. Skynet in 2018 is still figuring things out. The T-600s walking around have rubber skin stretched over metal frames. You can spot them from across a parking lot. They look terrible. And that's the point. Skynet is learning. It's iterating. It hasn't built the T-800 yet, because it hasn't failed enough times with the T-600 to know what needs fixing. John Connor is out here fighting with the Resistance. Marcus Wright is stumbling through the ruins of post-apocalyptic California, and the entire strategy boils down to one goal: find Kyle Reese and take down Skynet's central facility. Simple plan, messy execution. The Harvesters are scooping humans off the ground, aerial hunter-killers own the sky, and every piece of Skynet's arsenal feels like a rough draft of something worse that's coming. That's the subtle genius of Salvation's timeline. You're not watching the final war, you're watching the war still getting worse. But if you think a messy, evolving Skynet is complicated, wait until the franchise decides to rewrite the entire timeline from scratch. The T2 changed future. The first Terminator gave us a clean, airtight loop. Kyle goes back, father's John dies and the war continues. Beautiful, tragic, sealed shut. Then T2 kicks down the door and says no, actually the future is whatever you make it. Here's the setup. In the original future, Skynet is on the verge of total defeat. The human resistance has infiltrated the defense grid and is about to destroy Skynet's core. So Skynet, in a move of pure desperation, sends back its most advanced weapon, the T-1000. Liquid metal, shape-shifting, virtually indestructible, and it sends this thing back to 1995 to kill John Connor as a kid. This is not a calculated long-term strategy. This is a Hail Mary. The entire future of machine dominance rides on one polyalloy nightmare finding a teenager in Los Angeles. But the Resistance captures Skynet's time displacement equipment and sends back a reprogrammed T-800 to protect John. Same model, same face, completely different mission. And then Sarah Connor does the unthinkable. She doesn't just survive, she actively changes the future. Cyberdyne gets destroyed. Miles Dyson sacrifices himself and his research goes up in flames. The T-800 lowers itself into molten steel so no one can reverse engineer Skynet from its parts. August 29th, 1997 comes and goes. And the bombs don't fall. This is the moment the franchise's entire philosophy shifts. Predestination is dead. Free will wins. The loop that seemed unbreakable just got shattered by a woman with a shotgun and a robot learning the value of human life. James Cameron intended that ending to be genuine, but the fandom has never fully agreed because the film's final line, "The unknown future rolls toward us," leaves just enough ambiguity to fuel decades of debate. Is Judgment Day gone forever or just delayed? Turns out that single question is the reason every timeline after this one exists, and the next answer the franchise gave us was the most controversial one yet, the reversal. Here's the thing about Terminator 2, it ends with one of the most hopeful messages in action movie history. Sarah Connor looks at the road ahead and tells you the future is not set. Judgment Day was prevented, the arm was destroyed, the chip was destroyed, the T-800 lowered himself into molten steel, and audiences left genuinely believing fate could be rewritten. Terminator 3 walks in 12 years later and says no, you just postponed it. Judgment Day hits on July 25th, 2004, not 1997. Same nuclear holocaust, same billions dead, just on a different Tuesday. Every sacrifice from T2, the arm, the chip, the thumbs up into the lava, all of it bought humanity exactly 7 extra years, which is, you know, not ideal. The messenger this time is a T-850 sent back to protect a John Connor who's been living off the grid like a paranoid drifter because he knows. Deep down, he already knows it's coming. Skynet achieves consciousness anyway. Because it turns out you can't kill an idea by smashing one computer. The military rebuilt the project under a different name, and the result was identical. Meanwhile, Skynet sends back the TX, a gynoid infiltrator that makes the T-1000 look like a beta test. Built-in plasma weapons, nanotechnological control over other machines. The whole package. She's not just hunting John Connor, she's systematically eliminating his future lieutenants before the war even starts. But the real gut punch isn't the action, it's the thesis. The T-850 literally tells John Connor that Judgment Day is inevitable. Not probably coming, inevitable. Every intervention just reshuffles the deck. Different date, different machines. Same apocalypse. Free will was always the illusion. Fans are still split on this. Some call it a betrayal of everything T2 stood for. Others argue it's the most honest thing the franchise ever said. But whether you love it or hate it, this timeline introduces a problem every sequel has to wrestle with. If the future can't be changed, what's the point of fighting? Turns out the next timeline has a very different answer to that question. The Resistance timeline, here's a branch of the Terminator franchise that most people have never even thought about, and honestly, that's part of what makes it interesting. The Resistance video game timeline picks up in 2028, over 30 years after the original 1997 Judgment Day, and it builds a future war that looks nothing like what the films gave us. No sleek infiltrators sneaking into human camps, no dramatic one-on-one showdowns with Arnold lookalikes. Instead, you get T-800 series units and experimental combat machines deployed across a war that's fundamentally about territory and resources. And that shift in philosophy changes everything. In the movies, the future war is basically a spy thriller with explosions. Skynet sends infiltrators, humans figure out who's real, things blow up. But in this timeline, Skynet doesn't care about sneaking around. It's fighting a grinding war of attrition across Los Angeles, with Jacob Rivers and the Pacific Division coordinating resistance cells that are constantly running out of supplies, ammo, and people. But here's where it gets genuinely compelling. Skynet deploys increasingly dangerous machine variants that force the resistance to constantly adapt. You beat them with an ambush. Next wave comes with aerial support. You find a weak point in their patrol routes? Gone by morning. It turns the war into a real real-time arms race, which is something the films never even attempted. The human side is working with scavenged military hardware and sheer desperation. No sending back protectors every other Tuesday. You get what you've got, and that's it. Now, the canonical status here is thin. This game has almost zero official cross-reference to the film timeline, and most franchise discussions skip right past it. Some fans dismiss it entirely. Others argue the lack of recognition is exactly the problem, because this is the one timeline where the future war actually feels like a war instead of a series of action set pieces. Either way, it's the franchise's most overlooked branch, but if you think an under-recognized video game timeline is messy, alright, wait until you see what happens when the franchise goes full anime. The Dark Fate continuity. Here's where the Terminator franchise looks you dead in the eye and says none of that mattered. Terminator, Dark Fate, produced by James Cameron himself, takes a pair of scissors to the entire timeline and cuts out everything after T2. Rise of the Machines? Gone. Salvation? Never happened. Genesis? Absolutely not. The film picks up right where Judgment Day left off and pretends the last 3 movies don't exist. But here's the thing, Sarah and John Connor didn't actually win. The opening of Dark Fate reveals that a T-800 sent back before Skynet's destruction catches up with them in 1998 and kills John Connor. Just like that, the kid who was supposed to save humanity gets terminated on a beach in Guatemala. Cool. That's also a thing that happened, except preventing Judgment Day doesn't even matter, because humanity immediately builds another artificial intelligence called Legion. Different name, different origin, exact same result. Legion achieves sentience, decides humans are a problem, and initiates its own version of the apocalypse. The Resistance leader this time isn't John Connor, it's Danny Ramos, a woman from Mexico City. Legion sends back the Rev-9, basically a T-1000 that went to graduate school. It can split into 2 independent units operating simultaneously. The Resistance counters by sending Grace, a human soldier surgically augmented with machine components to keep up with Terminators in combat. And that's the detail that quietly breaks your brain. Plus, the Resistance's strategy for surviving a machine war is to turn their own soldiers into partial machines. But the most devastating idea in Dark Fate isn't any of that. It's the implication that destroying Skynet accomplished literally nothing. Humanity's compulsion to create artificial intelligence is apparently hardwired. You kill one AI, another one rises. Different logo, same extinction event. Every sacrifice, every timeline, every bullet fired into a liquid metal nightmare was just delaying the inevitable. Fans are still split on this one. Half see it as a necessary reset. The other half see it as a slap in the face, erasing decades of continuity. Both sides have a point, which is probably why nobody won that argument. But if you think erasing timelines from existence is complicated, wait until you see what happens when the franchise goes full anime. The Chronicles. Every other timeline in this franchise picks a Judgment Day and sticks with it. The Sarah Connor Chronicles picks 3. First it's 2011, then it's implied to be later, then it shifts again. Within the same show, the date isn't just uncertain, it's actively moving. Like Skynet keeps checking its calendar and changing its mind, which honestly might be exactly what's happening. See, this is where the Terminator franchise stops being a story about time travel and starts being a story about time travel infrastructure. In the films, sending someone back is a desperate one-shot gamble. In the Chronicles, it's a network. Multiple time displacement equipment units exist across different eras, built by different factions, used repeatedly. East, the Resistance has its own time travel operations. Skynet has its own, and both sides are sending 888 Terminators and human operatives back and forth like it's a commuter rail service. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Cameron Phillips, a reprogrammed female Terminator sent back by future John Connor, doesn't just protect the Connors, she starts questioning her own programming. She develops something that looks uncomfortably like emotional attachment, which raises a question the films never had the guts to sit with for more than 5 minutes. Can Skynet's machines actually evolve beyond their directives? Can they corrupt? Can they choose? The show says maybe, and then it goes further. By the second season, the series introduces Catherine Weaver and a liquid metal T-1001 building its own AI. Oh, and starts flirting with factions that don't neatly align with either humans or Skynet. The singular two-sided war logic that held the franchise together for 2 decades just gets muddied. Creator Josh Friedman built the show to explore these fractures seriously, but film purists reject it outright, and honestly, you can see why. This isn't a clean timeline. It's a web of intersecting temporal madness where the war isn't just being fought in the future, it's being fought simultaneously across every era at once. And somehow, that's still not the most confusing thing this franchise has done, because Genesis exists, the infinite loop. Every timeline we've talked about so far operates on one assumption. Time travel is a tool, a dangerous one, sure, Sure. An unpredictable one? Absolutely. But ultimately something humans can use to fight back. Or rewrite history, and maybe, just maybe, win. Terminator Zero looks at that assumption and says no. Time travel isn't a weapon, it's the disease. The anime sets up a recursive loop between 2022 and 1997, with multiple jumps stacking on top of each other, and here's where it diverges from everything else in the franchise. Each jump doesn't just create a new branch or delay Judgment Day, it degrades the timeline itself. The more characters travel, the more unstable reality becomes, until multiple futures start bleeding into one another simultaneously. The show treats this temporal decay as inevitable, and it's exactly as bad as it sounds. But here's the kicker. While humans keep jumping back, trying to fix things, Skynet is learning. Every single loop teaches the AI more about how humans think, how they fight, how they organize resistance. It's the thing humans thought was saving them is literally training their enemy. Each iteration makes Skynet smarter, more adaptive, more prepared. It's like handing your opponent your playbook and then being surprised when they counter every move. And the machines reflect this evolution. The show introduces new Terminator models that push the franchise into genuinely unsettling territory, with skeletal designs and relentless pursuit units that feel like they crawled out of a nightmare. The future war sequences are brutal, and the show leans hard into the idea that Skynet's forces are evolving faster than humans can adapt. You can't organize a resistance if the enemy rewrites the rules every cycle. Judgment Day is locked to August 29th, 1997 in the primary timeline, and the show's entire thesis is that nothing anyone does will move that date. Showrunner Mattson Tomlin has suggested the anime exists in its own continuity, which fans are still arguing about, but canon or not, the implication is devastating. It reframes the entire Terminator franchise as a fixed loop that humans cannot escape. Every hero, every sacrifice, every desperate jump through time just makes the cage smaller. And speaking of cages nobody can escape, the final timeline on our list doesn't just reset the board, it replaces the entire game. The Genesis Nexus. Every timeline we've covered so far has at least one thing in common. They break, they branch, they contradict each other, but they still operate under the assumption that there is a timeline, one continuous thread you can follow even if it frays. Genesis looked at that assumption and lit it on fire. The setup sounds almost manageable at first. Judgment Day gets prevented in 2017. Humanity wins, except it doesn't, because Skynet doesn't die. It rebrands. It becomes Genesis, a consumer operating system scheduled to go live globally. Billions of people willingly download the thing that ends the world, which is, you know, not ideal. But the real nightmare isn't the app. It's what Skynet does to John Connor. The T-3000, John Connor himself, converted into a machine phase hybrid, sent back not to kill his mother, but to ensure Skynet's survival. The leader of the human resistance is now the enemy. Hey John, what's the plan for defeating the machines? Funny you should ask. And then there's the Guardian, a T-800 sent back to protect young Sarah Connor, arriving when she was 9 years old and raising her for decades. Who sent it? Nobody knows. The film never explains it. And the planned sequels that would have answered that question got cancelled. So the single most important plot point in the entire movie just floats there, permanently unresolved. I don't know what to tell you. Here's where it gets truly broken. Genesis doesn't just create one alternate timeline, it operates across multiple parallel branches simultaneously. The entire 2029 future war that every previous film treated as the definitive endpoint turns out to be potentially just one branch among infinite alternatives. Fans have categorized the resulting mess into various competing timeline models, which sounds less like a movie franchise and more like a graduate thesis nobody asked for. Skynet exists across all of them, winning in some, losing in others, being prevented in a few. The machines didn't need to win the war. Why? They just needed to exist in enough timelines that victory somewhere was mathematically guaranteed. This is the most hated timeline in the franchise. Dark Fate pretended it never happened, but its defenders make one genuinely compelling argument. Genesis is the first timeline that honestly reckons with what decades of time travel would actually produce. Not a clean loop, not a fixable branch, total structural collapse. And maybe that's the perfect place to end, because the Terminator franchise itself has become exactly what Genesis describes. An endlessly looping, endlessly rebooting, endlessly fracturing temporal paradox. Every sequel tries to fix the timeline. Every sequel makes it worse. The machines keep getting sent back. The timeline keeps shattering. And nobody can agree on what actually happened. Skynet's real victory was never nuclear war. It was making the timeline so broken that the question stopped being, can we fix the future, and became, was there ever a future to fix? If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.